Mr. Swapka on behalf of the Council. Please.
Thank you very much, Madam President, honourable members, Commissioner. I'll give just. The Middle East is a region of strategic interest for the EU and a priority of our discussions in the Council. I would therefore like to thank the Parliament for scheduling such a timely debate. The Middle East is part of our neighbourhood, immediately adjacent to some of our member states. It plays a pivotal role in our security, geopolitical positioning, energy needs and migration challenges. For these reasons, a stable Middle East is of crucial importance for Europe. Notwithstanding our broad engagement over the years, it remains one of the most volatile regions in the world. Conflicts such as the war in Gaza, the Israel-Hezbollah tensions, the Syrian civil war, and destabilising actions by Iran continue to profoundly influence regional and global politics and make stability in the regions the more elusive. Pressing issues need to be addressed, but there are also emerging opportunities for peace, stability and economic cooperation that must be seized. In Syria, we stand before a historic window of opportunity. The EU, alongside our key partners, must work decisively and cohesively to advance a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned, inclusive political process supported by the United Nations. Our collective goal is to establish a government that respects all components of society, rebuilds institutions, combats Daesh and ensures the complete destruction of chemical weapons. In Gaza, after months of negotiation, a breakthrough was finally achieved. The release of hostages we have witnessed in recent weeks is a reason for satisfaction. We hope that all those held captive by Hamas will be released and foreseen in a deal. They are equally pleased to see thousands of trucks carrying much needed humanitarian aid crossing Gaza without any obstacle. The deal is fragile, but it is a relief to see that so far both sides are upholding their commitments. Many open issues remain to be tackled in the next phases, and the EU is ready to play its part. As a contribution to the ceasefire and the request of both sides, with the agreement of Egypt, the EU has redeployed the European Union Border Assistance Mission at the Rafah crossing point between Gaza and Egypt in support of the Palestinian Authority. Between 70 and 100 civilians, including some in need of medical care, are being transferred out of Gaza every day. The EU is also working closely with the Palestinian Authority for the day after, focusing on reforms, reconstruction, recovery and the long-term implementation of the two-state solution. We are also opening a new chapter of strengthened engagement through the EU-Israel Association Council and the first ever EU-Palestine high-level dialogue. The situation in Lebanon is another key factor for long-term stability in the Middle East. We welcome the election of the President and formation of a fully fledged government to take forward a reform-oriented and forward-looking agenda. President, honourable members, Commissioner, the EU's approach to the Middle East region has always been one of partnership and cooperation with other actors. We should continue to pursue this approach through an active engagement with the G7, Arab states and other partners. We should work towards a solution that may bring long-term stability and prosperity to the region, starting with a relaunching of Middle East peace process. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Facoltà ora di intervenire.
Thank you. Let me now give the floor to Commissioner Suica for the Commission, please.
Dear Chair, dear Minister Slapka, honourable members of the European Parliament. It's an honour to be here to present the Commission's foreseen contribution to the European Union Middle East strategy. The wider Middle East is a region of key importance for the European Union in terms of geopolitical positioning, security and stability and economic cooperation. It is also one of the most volatile areas in the world, with multiple conflicts having strong humanitarian consequences and repercussions on regional and global politics, in terms of peace, security and the global order, but also migration, energy and economics. The current disruptive and uncertain environment requires a strong signal of enhanced European engagement in the Middle East peace process. The ceasefire in Gaza, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, and the election of a new leadership in Lebanon present an unprecedented opportunity for political transition, and strong European presence and engagement is required in these cases too. This new reality calls for a fresh and comprehensive approach and the European Union engagement to ensure a more impactful European role in the Middle East, to stabilise the region and anchor countries more closely to the European Union. Peace and stability in the Middle East are an overarching European interest. Key to this is a permanent peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, based on the two-state solution, which is the only way to ensure peace and security for both peoples. In seeking to revive a political horizon towards the two-state solution, the European Union should work closely with like-minded partners, the G7 and with regional partners. Also, thanks to its long-lasting financial engagement, the European Union is well placed to play a leading role in the post-conflict stabilisation and early recovery reconstruction, security and support to the future governance in Gaza. For the European Union, a revitalised Palestine Authority is the only viable partner, and we will continue to push and support for much-needed reforms and modernisation. The European Union has for many years promoted the development of relations between Israel and the countries of the region, in the understanding that normalisation of their bilateral relations will be beneficial to all parties, and represents a fundamental step for the stabilisation of the region as a whole. We continue to see further regional integration as an asset for a comprehensive and lasting peace for the entire region, and stand ready to work to this end together with our regional and international partners. We should also identify and support new forms of cooperation that can bring significant opportunities on a variety of horizontal topics that are strategic for the region, from natural resources to clean energy, critical minerals and access to its growing educated workforce. The IMEC project, which is India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, has been endorsed at G7 level to promote transportation and communication links between Europe and Asia through the Middle East, and if strategically designed, it can also be a key deliverable of an enhanced Middle East peace process. It is time for the European Union to use its convening power as well as its financial clout, intensifying reforms, allowing a stable transition, taking full part in the process of reconstruction and providing an offer for economic prosperity. Increasing the engagement with the Gulf countries will be another key component. Political and financial support from key Gulf countries will be particularly important to the European Union's efforts to reignite the Middle East peace process. Since the signature of the 2022 EU Strategic Partnership for the Gulf, the European Union has sought to increase its engagement with the 6 GCC partners, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, which are emerging as important geostrategic players. Last but not least, the European Union's approach to the Middle East should ensure its full synergy with the proposals to be made under the new Pact for the Mediterranean, both in terms of enhanced bilateral economic cooperation partnerships, but also in terms of regional and thematic initiatives. The European Union should reflect on leveraging on its biggest strength, the internal market, the creation of mutual investment opportunities and corridors for cooperation in key sectors such as energy, water and digital connectivity. Dear members of the European Parliament, during my hearing, I made it clear that I view working with you, honourable members of this Parliament, as an essential ingredient of my professional DNA and as key to successive initiatives and to the formation of a stronger European unity. Against that background, I will be carefully listening to you today and to your suggestions of what shall be the key principles and key components of the European Union's approach to the Middle East. Thank you.
Grazie. Ha facoltà ora di intervenire
Thank you. Let me now give the floor to Mr. McAllister, please.
Madam President, Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, geography dictates that developments in the Middle East are always of key interest to the European Union. Yet things are as they are. Our influence in the region is at a low. A fragmented patchwork of strategies has failed to account for the political realities of the region, and internal divisions amongst our member states have hindered meaningful impact. Amid claims of double standards, a shifting balance of power, and an unpredictable US administration, you, dear Commissioner, together with the High Representative, will have to find common ground amongst our 27 member states on issues where certainly no easy answers exist. Our strategy must indeed prioritise the two-state solution for a sovereign Israel and the Palestinian territories based on the 1967 borders and with Jerusalem as the shared capital. This is, in the end, the only sustainable path to peace. We should therefore resist the temptation to address only the immediate crisis in Gaza, but attend to all obstacles that present the realisation of the two-state solution. An effective Middle East strategy must treat the Mullah regime in Iran for what it is, a mastermind of instability and terror. The fall of the Assad regime in Syria was a strategic blow to Iran, one that didn't go unnoticed with Hezbollah either. After 2 years of political stalemate, the new government in Lebanon offers hope for much-needed recovery. Let's use the leverage, this momentum, to break Iran's so-called axis of resistance. And finally, while we admittedly have limited influence in the Middle East, we can constructively engage countries that do: Turkey, the Gulf states, Egypt and Jordan. The High Representative has indicated that the new Middle East strategy might take longer than originally planned. Indeed, let us not act in haste. This strategy must be prepared carefully. But, dear Commissioner, I would ask you to also consult the European Parliament, because here there's a wealth of expertise, and I believe it would be highly beneficial to consult us before finalising the new strategy. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Ha facoltà ora di intervenire.
Thank you. Mr. Magnatis now, please.
Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, είναι κρίμα που είπατε εκπρόσωπος δεν βρίσκεται.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that it's a shame that we haven't got the Commissioner, the High Representative here to talk about the Middle East, because it's an important region for the European Union on human terms, but also geopolitical terms. And unfortunately, the European Union isn't involved as it should be in that region. Our new strategy needs to fill that gap, because we need to act now. I mean, the ceasefire agreement has given us a little bit of hope, and the provision of humanitarian aid and the building of new infrastructure really should be a priority now. Trump's statement on building a Riviera on the Mediterranean in Gaza really means that we absolutely have to act. We can't waste this opportunity. The two-state solution, a democratic Palestinian state living side by side with an Israeli state whose security is guaranteed, is the only possibility for this region. Then we've got Lebanon. We now have a government that's been formed after many years of paralysis, and that should provide encouragement to us. However, in spite of the efforts that are being made, we're still far from having a solution for the region as a whole. We need to act to ensure that the barbaric past is got over. We need to ensure that in Syria, the National Council works to guarantee the rights of ethnic minorities and ensure that the country works. We can't see interference from third countries. Relations with Syria need to be based on the protection of multiculturalism in Syria. And then to conclude on international law, including the law of the sea, well, we need to see all of that guaranteed as well, because we know that Syria is a key player in the region. We need to guarantee stability in the region, and in order to do that, we need to be present. Our absence needs to be corrected as quickly as possible. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Martin Frias now.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
President, Commissioner, there's a mistake here in the Commission report, in the Commission approach. How is it possible that we're always against Israel? Why is everything that Commission puts forward against Israel? This isn't based on freedom and democracy and on protecting those who were attacked. No, instead, this approach is based on those who want to annihilate Israel. How is it possible that you continue to provide support for UNRWA? UNRWA has terrorists as its employees who are spreading hate against Israel and its associates, and it should be included on the list of terrorist organizations. The European Union has a easy way of re-explaining what's happened. We need to stop protecting Iran and other terrorists. We must defend the only democracy in this region. That's our right, and it is their right to create a new approach to peace and cooperation in the region.
Thank you. Mr. Coles now, please.
Sorry?
Mrs. Miranda.
Un punto all'ordine del giorno. Please. Micro.
Quiero referirme al artículo 10.
I'd like to refer to Article 10.4. This says that in the debates, members should not to use offensive language, defamatory language or hate speech, or should not to be used. So the UNRWA is not a terrorist organisation; it's a UN organisation. So I'd like to see that rectified in the record.
Fatto benissimo a puntualizzarlo.
Thank you. You did well to raise that. Obviously, we note your point of order. Thank you. Now, Mr. Coles, please.
Madam Vice President, Madam Commissioner, the EU speaks of strategy in the Middle East, yet too often we watch from the sidelines. The Abraham Accords prove that Arab-Israeli cooperation is possible, yet we played little part or no part at all. While the US and Gulf states lead, we remain reactive and divided. First, we must strengthen bilateral ties and act as facilitators where needed. Arab states are taking steps towards peace. Our role should be to support, not to obstruct. The EU was built on regional cooperation. We have the know-how to contribute. Second, we must not leave a vacuum that autocrats will fill. That means direct engagement with the Gulf partners, countering Iran-backed militias, and cutting off financing that enables Hamas to rebuild. And it is incomprehensible that the European Commission and the Council still refuse to designate the IRGC as the terrorist organisation. The region will decide its future, but if the EU wants a seat at the table, we must act, not just observe. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Votmans.
Thank you. Mrs. Votmans now, please.
Dank u wel, mevrouw de voorzitter, commissaris.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues. Europe needs to assume its responsibility in this conflict. In 1949, we gave land to Israel, but since then the Palestinians have been persecuted. And it's not just a fight against Hamas now, it's a question of ethnic cleansing. President Trump has even been talking about purchasing Gaza. People talk as though it's not talking about people here. People talk like it's trade. Buildings have been destroyed. But where are we, colleagues, the Commissioner? We cannot just stand to one side. We absolutely need to be involved. We need to ensure that the agreement is respected, and we need to call for all hostages to be released. We need to see a review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. We need to respect the orders which have been emitted against the leaders of Hamas and Israel. We need to make sure that Europe has a role here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Neumann now.
Commissioner, dear colleagues, people in the Middle East have endured violence and protracted displacement for decades. There is zero appetite for Iranian terrorism, Russian destabilization, Chinese exploitation, or the chaos that Trump has unleashed in just 2 weeks, announcing the withdrawal of security from ISIS camps, threatening massive forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, or cutting all funding to human rights defenders in the region. Well, and the European Union? Too often we stood by divided or distracted while people on the ground begged us to step up. But it doesn't have to stay that way. And there are clear opportunities of what we can do. Let's use the EU-Israel Association Council to urge Israel to uphold the ceasefire. Let's strongly support UNRWA and its humanitarian work and the United Nations in the region as a whole. Let's engage with Lebanon's new leadership. Let's support a green growth strategy for the Middle East in coordination with the Gulf states. Let's step up our support to local civil society and all those that promote human rights, freedom and democracy in the region. And this time, dear colleagues, let's get it right in Syria. The country is in transition with a blatant power vacuum. Iran and Russia are ready to step back in, yet the people that I met on the ground are fighting for an inclusive, for a peaceful future. For years, dictators in the region crushed calls for democracy, warning, do you want to end up like Syria? Let's rewrite that narrative. And let's show what a European foreign policy supporting local partners and stepping up to regional bullies can achieve, turning the region from our biggest worry to our strongest partner.
Grazie, mi raccomando al rispetto dei tempi. Onorevole Boylan.
Thank you. Please stick to your speaking time. Mrs. Boylan now, please.
The repeated violations of the agreement by Israel is threatening a fragile ceasefire. There must be accountability for the latest killings and the failure to allow medical evacuations and for aid to enter. The Israeli government must be held to account for the attacks in the West Bank, and we need action against the increasing extremist settler violence. All of us who respect international law were horrified by President Trump's proposition to ethnically cleanse Gaza and steal what little land the Palestinian people still have. This plan is colonialism in its most brutal form, and the silence from the Commission was astounding. The Commission must answer for the EU's astounding moral failure to stand up to Trump's colonial rhetoric or attacks on international law and the multilateral institutions that we claim to hold so dear. Let us be very clear. Gaza is not for sale. Gaza is not for sale, and the land and resources belong to the Palestinian people. The EU's strategy for the Middle East, if it respected international law, would be suspension of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. It would mean sanctions. It would mean the end of weapons transfers from EU member states and full implementation of the ICJ advisory opinion of the 19th of July. We cannot have a long-term strategy until we recognise the immorality and illegality of the occupation and pursue true justice for the people of Palestine. The EU has spent the last 15 months engaging in moral cowardice in the face and in complicity with genocide, and this cannot continue if we need to respect international law and the protection of multilateral institutions. Free Palestine.
Grazie. Facoltà di intervenire.
Thank you. Let me now give the floor to Mr. Grazoulis, please.
Hello. The EU has lost geopolitical influence in the world and the Middle East, and not only the Middle East. Its voice is not heard in the world or its regions. I think if Europe continues to be divided, not united, its voice will be heard less and less, both in the world, in the Middle East and elsewhere. The Commissioner has boasted that there's a ceasefire in Palestine, but at what expense? Due to Europe, on the first day, on the day of inauguration, Trump took action to reach the ceasefire and free the hostages. The US is heard in all the world. If the EU continues the same policy, its future will be very complicated. We have heard talks about the third anniversary of war in Ukraine. What has Europe achieved? Why Putin doesn't listen to its voice? Why Putin is not afraid of the EU? Why does he continue the war against Ukraine? Europe has to be united. If you are united, you are strong. Trump said, I will deal with this problem. I'll stop the war in the Ukraine. But it's more important for us, not to America. It's on our doorstep. The occupation of Europe is going on. Nobody knows on which conditions the peace will be achieved, but I am sure that the bloodshed will stop. I think that this is a great shame on Europe, one of the most powerful economic unions, which has no principles and doesn't hear. The countries of the world don't hear this union. We have to start reflecting on this. Get your act together, respect yourself, and then other countries will hear you.
Facoltà di intervenire l'onorevole Lopez.
Thank you. Mr. Lopez-Istúriz-White now, please.
Hello, Commissioner. Thank you very much. The EU Middle East strategy. What strategy? Do we have a strategy? Good. First time. The ones that they have a strategy are the Russians, the Chinese, Turkeys, Iranians in the region. It's about time that as the Europeans we have a strategy for the Middle East and not let others interfere. We have a different approach and we should implement it. We should be enthusiastic about the Abraham agreements. Here in this Parliament we have not been. In the Commission they have not been. We have to. Prosperity for the people in the region, including the Palestinians, that they cannot be left out of this. Of course, we all agree on that, different from other countries. And then we have to be clear. Blacklist, terrorist list. We have to help the Palestinian people, the Lebanese people, not to suffer the tyranny of terrorist organizations financed by Iran and by others and supported by others, like Muslim Brotherhood, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Hamidum, Hezbollah, Hamas. We have to do this from a European perspective now. Thank you.
Grazie. Ha facoltà di intervenire l'onorevole Ayo.
Thank you, Mrs. Jalul Murona. You have the floor.
Buenas tardes, Presidenta, Comisaria.
Thank you, Commissioner. For a week now in this Parliament, we've been celebrating the ceasefire between Israel and Palestine and the return of hostages, but there's no guarantee of peace in Palestine. There's also the West Bank, there's the displacement of people, and there's illegal settlement. There's no peace while Hamas holds on to the hostages, and we can see people wanting to return to try and rebuild a house, but Donald Trump thinks he can buy everything and ignore international law. But the seriousness of these statements have not seen a response from the European Commission. In this context, we are now looking at a strategy should be built on the reconstruction of Gaza. We don't even know what's part of the work programme 2025. What kind of reconstruction is the Commission thinking about? Can it guarantee it? How can it ensure that key actors will be involved? How can it ensure that this Parliament will be involved? We need leadership. We need support in democratic processes. What are we going to do with Iran? It's been asked a few times here. What are we going to do with Hezbollah and other terrorist forces and Hamas? So we need a strategy. We need to look at the idea that our priority is peace. We need to see the High Representative here, who should be here to explain. And if a strategy is one of silence, then she's mistaken.
L'onorevole Tanger Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Tanger Correa. Now, please.
Madam Vice President, Madam Commissioner, well, I can see here that we are discussing a wider, comprehensive EU Middle East strategy. Well, let me say one thing. The strategy is the same. I cannot see any kind of improvement. I see difference in the region, but I don't see a different attitude from the European Union. On the contrary, it's more of the same. We now have a ceasefire in Gaza, which is a good step, but it's not enough. We have a ceasefire in Lebanon, good step, not enough. And the big question mark in Syria, which probably is not a good step and definitely not enough. So we have to take a more proactive approach to these questions. And I just have to remember you, 5 times there was put on the table the solution of 2 states, and 5 times didn't work. And because of the Palestinians, not of the Israelis. And I remember you that the Black September in 1970, when then King Hussein fought the Palestinians, and there was about between, we don't know the numbers, but between 10 and 1,000 deaths. Nobody cared about. But now they care because it's the Israelis who are doing it. But when it was the Jordanians, nobody cared about. So, is there a solution? Maybe. But the solution goes through an international administration of the Palestinian areas, because they themselves cannot do it as it is proven. To say 2-state solution and bye-bye, it's not a solution. We have to have an international administration of Gaza, international administration of the West Bank, and to be very careful with the Palestinians living in Jordan. Thank you very much.
Grazie, onorevole Brudischi. Prego.
Thank you, Mr. Brudzinski. Now, please.
Bardzo dziękuję. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the European Union should be monitoring the situation, but it is not the Union that should be the author of a long-term agreement. It is up to the two sides. Today, we are witnessing another dimension of the biblical conflict, and we should diplomatically support Israel and the Palestinians to find the right solution. But we must, first and foremost, protect the security of our own citizens in our member states. And this stabilized situation in the Middle East can mean another wave of immigrants to Europe. So we need to ask wealthy Gulf states to help the Palestinians, and we should not attract immigrants to Europe. We should help them where they live.
Thank you, Mr. Pyatt now.
Dear colleagues, yes, the European Union is committed to lasting peace in the Middle East, supporting a two-state solution and halting Iran's destabilizing actions. However, the EU's ability to influence the region has been limited by the need for consensus among all member states, resulting in a fragmented approach. This lack of unity has prevented the EU from fully leveraging its foreign policy potential. A European Parliament report in March 2023 on the functioning of the External Action Service and advocating for a stronger EU in the world called for a stronger EU presence in global affairs, but progress on these recommendations seems minimal. Without significant changes in shaping EU foreign policy, the EU's role will remain constrained. Given the current geopolitical situation, it's time to implement the European Parliament's proposals from 2 years ago and strengthen the EU's positive foreign policy impact, including in the Middle East. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Svondel.
Thank you, Mr. Zovndal.
En riviera med guldglitrende skyskrabere bygget på knoglerne af 50.000 døde palæstinenser.
Thank you very much. Well, almost 50,000 Palestinians have died, and all of this is a terrible thing, and it really shows a massive lack of humanity. Netanyahu's carpet-bombed the Gaza Strip for months, and Trump is proposing to ethnically cleanse 2 million people from Gaza, in spite of this being against international law. In the West Bank, the Israelis have carried out further massacres, and there are areas that are blockaded, areas that Palestinians can't access. It's clear to everyone that the international legal order is threatened. Israel is ignoring the calls of the international community to end this genocide. Israel is ignoring the rulings of the International Criminal Court as well, and it has labelled UNRWA, a UN organisation, as a terrorist organisation. We need to trigger Article 2 of the Israel-EU agreement so that we stop goods that are produced in the occupied territories coming into Europe. Peace requires security, yes, but for both peoples. Thank you. Thank you. Please stick to your speaking time, or I'm going to have to switch your microphones off, unfortunately. Mr. Oliveira, please.
Thank you, Madam President. We want to see long-lasting peace in the Middle East, and that means that we need to put an end to the criminal policy of Israel against the Palestinian people. It means there needs to be a ceasefire, it needs to become permanent, and we need to provide urgent access to humanitarian aid, which is still limited. It also means the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip and the end of their attacks in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. It needs to see Palestinian rights being respected, and also the creation of a Palestinian state as set out under UN rules. It means that we need to see an end to aggression from Israel against Lebanon and Syria, and their withdrawal from these territories. Declaration from President Trump in relation to the Gaza Strip and expulsion of the Palestinian people reveal the complicit nature of US policy with Israel. The deafening silence of the EU in relation to these statements shows the EU's complicity with the US in this area.
A blue card for you, Onorevole Miranda.
Mrs. Miranda, please.
Presidenta, eu queria perguntar.
Let me ask Mr. Oliveira. You're a Portuguese national. In Portugal and Galicia, there's a great deal of solidarity. But in this Parliament, it's sorely lacking. There's a wall of deafening silence. Silence for the victims in Gaza at the hands of the Israelis. Why is it like that? And I cannot go to Palestine. I've been vetoed. I've been banned by the Israelis from travelling to Palestine. Nevertheless, there is an EP resolution talking about this. And yet upstairs we have some Israeli delegates. They're free to roam around as they see fit. Why do you think it's like that?
Thank you for your question. In fact, the position of the European Union has been one of complicity with Israel's policy and double standards. The EU intervenes in so many different conflicts, but it's closed its eyes to what's happened in Palestine with Israel's genocidal policy. This double standards, this complicity of the EU comes up against or runs counter to popular sentiment, not only in Portugal but across Europe. People want to show solidarity with the Palestinian people, with their struggle. We will continue to bring here to the European Parliament the voice of the people on the street, those who want to see solidarity with the Palestinian people and with their rights.
Thank you. Mr. Sellner, please.
More than €1 billion for Palestine since 7th of October. 2 billion for Turkey and Lebanon. And Damascus, those terrorists are going to get money soon. But why? Where? You've sent €4 billion to the Middle East. That hasn't prevented the civil war in Syria, hasn't prevented the Taliban in Afghanistan or other conflicts. You have an old, obsolete strategy, and it's already failed once. We have a new strategy. Instead of sending EU money to the Middle East, instead, we should focus on Europe. Because if it continues like this, we won't need a strategy for the Middle East anymore, because the Middle East will be here in Europe. Last year, some 400,000 Syrians came to Germany. But why? The Syrian civil war has ended. There are 1 million Syrians living in Germany. They could go home now. So instead of spending our money throughout the world, instead of throwing it away, focus on housing, focus on bridges in Europe. It's not our task to rebuild Gaza or Syria. What we need to do is rebuild Germany.
Grazie, onorevole Anadiotis.
Thank you. Mr. Anadiotis now, please.
Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, ας μην λησμονούμε τα...
Colleagues, we must not forget the fact that Turkey has been a destabilizing factor in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the Middle East with their expansionist policy. They continue to make threatening statements against two member states, Greece and Cyprus. They also make statements against Syria and Iraq. And there's, if we need to ensure we're not funding Turkey. In relation to Syria, we think we should send observers in cooperation with the OSCE and the UN, and also ensure that elections are held. We need to see sanctions applied to benefit the Syrian people, but making sure that we don't fund terrorist organisations. As a member of the Security Council, Greece can support this. Now, in relation to Gaza and the West Bank, we need to send humanitarian aid. We need to support decisions taken by international courts. And we are pleased to see the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and we want to see a free Palestinian state.
Thank you. Mrs. Bentele now, please. Colleagues, well, the decisive player in the Middle East is the US with its military strength. I think that's clear to everyone now. But we, as the EU, also have strengths that we could use in the Middle East. We're strong when it comes to providing humanitarian assistance. We have experience when it comes to institution building, and we're good at building regional markets and also cross-border cooperation. And there's an awful lot to be done at the moment, Commissioner, as you said, building infrastructure, renewable energies, water supply. A stronger European commitment could really do a great deal to achieve peace. And we should also use our external economic tools. At the same time, colleagues, I haven't heard a great deal about our red lines, and we need to be clear on those. So, no cooperation or financing for terrorism, de-radicalization, fighting hate speech, promoting democratic processes, and guaranteeing Israel's security. Thank you very much.
Assis.
Thank you very much. Mr. Assis now.
Muito obrigado, Senhora Presidente.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. The EU has found it difficult to deal with the Middle East over many years. And various member states have different foreign policies. Sometimes they're antagonistic. They cancel each other out. But what have we seen in recent weeks? We've seen worrying events. We've seen obscene, crazy statements by President Trump about Gaza and the Palestinians. You know, we heard it straight from the horse's mouth a few days ago. Israel's government has been acting in an unacceptable way. It has the most right-wing government in history. What it's doing brings many things into question. This Israeli government is violating principles of Zionism. And then we have to look at Iran. Iran is causing permanent instability in the region. Given this backdrop, the EU must not ignore its responsibilities. Today, we must keep an eye on recent developments, and we must play a more active role in supporting a two-state solution, recognizing both peoples. This means that we need to recognize the legitimacy of the Palestinian state. And I turn to my own country, Portugal. Portugal must recognize Palestine as a state, and that will help us to resolve this problem. But admittedly, this is a complex problem.
Onorevole Olbeni.
Mr. Holveni now, please.
Thanks a lot, Madam Chair, the Commissioner. Tisztelt képviselőtársaim, sikerült elmozdulni a holtpontról Közel-Keleten, ez a jó hír. A gázai, a szíriai és libanoni fejlemények...
Ladies and gentlemen, well, we have a situation in the Middle East, obviously, and it needs to be stabilized. Since 2011, millions of Syrian refugees have had to leave their homeland. There are millions now waiting to return to Syria. There are also many, many internally displaced people in Syria. 90% of the population lives off humanitarian assistance. And for a few weeks, we really have been focusing on Syria now. And one major goal, I think, is for Syrian refugees to go back to Syria. But the current government obviously needs to guarantee human rights, and the conditions for people to return home need to be created. Questions need to be answered as well. Where are the people who return going to live? Where are their children going to go to school? And we haven't had any answers to those questions yet. The Christian communities are disappearing in the Middle East. And this isn't just a religious issue. The European Union needs to provide moral support to Christians in the Middle East. And here I'm talking about Christians in Lebanon, Christians in Syria. Religious freedom needs to be guaranteed. Thank you.
Mrs. Maréchal, please.
Je vais parler en français.
I'll be speaking French. Well, fortunately, because of the vague objectives of this strategy, the EU is reinforcing its identity as passive and talking about peace and harmony, but it's not really updating its diplomatic software. In these political choices, the real problems are being simply avoided. What about the aggression of Turkey towards its neighbourhood when Ankara is instrumentalising the disorder in the Middle East to its own interest? And what about the very problematic subject of the new Syrian leadership? And what about the Islamic State in Iraq and Al-Qaeda, which have an influence in Syria? And when we hear statements from Macron and France, a country that has been a victim of terrorism, is giving terrorists international respectability. Just to remember the example of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Remember what our responsibilities and our tasks are in the region. We want to prevent ourselves from the terrorist risk. We want to protect ourselves from migration risk, and we also want to protect Syrians. Thank you very much. Mrs. Joveva, please.
There are no words that would sufficiently express how absolutely appalled I am by the statements from the American president. Throughout the history, American involvement in the Middle East has only worsened the situation by prolonging conflicts with military engagement and lack of coherent strategies. Meanwhile, the EU has been rather unsuccessfully trying to resolve resulting humanitarian crisis. Enough. This time, the EU has to take a stand and not be bullied into the unimaginable transitions of the world, including not supporting ethnic cleansing and permanent displacements of people from their land, their homes, to create new American playground. We need to help create regional alliances and not conflicts. And while many of you are turning a blind eye, or worse, are even glad to see it, maybe you'll understand this. If all bets are off and the hell breaks out, the shockwaves will reach the European Union. This is not just about the region. It's about the very fabric of humanity.
Grazie, onorevole Shirdewan.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shirdewan is next.
Thank you very much, President. The aim of an EU strategy for the Middle East must, of course, be a lasting peace in the region, and there are two prerequisites. Firstly, the recognition of Kurdish self-government in north and east Syria and the resumption of diplomatic relations with Kurdistan. The regime change in Syria is now an opportunity to enforce the Kurdish self-determination in a multi-ethnic state. And this is something that Turkey must accept. Erdogan's illegal war on the Kurdish people must end at once. Secondly, we need the recognition of the state of Palestine by the European Council. This as part of a two-state solution. We need to have a sovereign Palestinian state alongside a sovereign Israel. This reality must then be recognised by the Netanyahu government and in particular by Donald Trump. His statements on Gaza's future are scandalous, dangerous and must be firmly rejected. Thank you.
Danke. Es folgt jetzt Ruth Firmenich.
The next speaker is Ruth Firmenich.
Herr Präsident, meine Damen und Herren.
President, ladies and gentlemen, the situation in Gaza is getting worse and worse. And the right-wing Israeli government is in line with Trump, who wants to draw a turf out the Palestinians and turn it into a resort. Rather than a Palestinian state, this is going to be a luxury Riviera. Well, these are simply inhuman plans, and they should be on the rubbish heap of history. Now we have the ceasefire, but it's at stake at the moment. What's going to be the fate of the hostages and the aid deliverers? What can we hear from the EU? Not very much. Those who like to play the moral authorities all fall silent when it comes to Palestinians, and that's losing us the last of our credibility. Like the US, Germany will continue to deliver weapons to Israel. My party, the Sarah-Wagenknecht Connect Alliance, is calling for an end to the weapons delivery. Rather than weapons, we need intervention to create an independent Palestinian state in the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you.
Mulțumesc și eu.
Thank you too. Next is Ms. Ingeborg Terlach.
Beste collega's.
Colleagues, Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria. It's all a big mess, and this threatens the lives of thousands of people. And this should interest us as a people, and the consequences will be hitting our society. And this is why we need to be aware of the fact that there's a confrontation that has reached our societies in Europe. And Donald Trump acts as if he were developing a new golf resort for the rich. And yet we see that there are millions of people who are running away. They need safe housing and food. The European Union requires a strategy for the Middle East, just like the Middle East needs Europe, and I ask the Commission to do this as soon as possible.
Thank you. The floor goes to Lucia Annunziata.
Thank you. Donald Trump presented himself as a pacifier and in a few weeks turned to be Mr. Chaos. But we Europeans should not be afraid of this. The truth is that the more America withdraws in its nationalism and the more we can move into a space of influence greater than ever. In the Middle East, many influent countries are orphaned in this moment of any initiative. Lebanon, Gulf, Syria, Israel itself, which is not the kingdom of Benjamin Netanyahu, so it's a much more complex country. We have to work to revive this network of alliances. I hope that the High Representative, as Mrs. Callas, will take this step and will work with this Parliament, as many of my colleagues who have spoken today before me in this room are asking, and as you know, it's urgent to have an answer. Thank you.
Mulțumesc. Thank you very much. The floor goes to Cristian Terhes.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, two major topics must be at the center of the EU Middle East strategy. First, stop rewarding the bad behavior. The European Union allocates hundreds of millions of euros to the Palestinian Authority, which continues to implement the pay for slave program, based on which families of terrorists who have killed or injured Israeli citizens get a pension. As long as individuals are incentivized, even with money, to kill other people, there will not be peace. Second, start the de-radicalization. Even as we speak, UNRWA schools are using textbooks that indoctrinate Palestinian children to hate Jews, motivate them to kill Jews, and teach them to violate, that the violence is the method to achieve their political aspirations. Education shapes minds and societies. Today, however, Palestinian textbooks glorify terrorism, promote martyrdom, and incite children to violence, rather than teaching them coexistence and how to pursue political aspirations through non-violent means. I call, therefore, that no money be given anymore to the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA schools until the pay for slave program is not abolished and the school's curriculum de-radicalized. Thank you.
Mulțumesc.
Thank you. I give the floor to Abir Al-Sahnani.
Commissioner, Speaker, representative of the Council, dear colleagues, President Trump says that he is committed to buying and owning the Gaza Strip. He says that the Palestinians can get much better housing in neighboring countries. Wow, I did not know actually that the conflict in Israel and Palestine was about better housing. And you know what? Surprisingly enough, Prime Minister Netanyahu says it's an innovative proposal. And the world is silent. It may come as a surprise to you, Mr. Donald Trump, but neither people, nor their rights, nor their lands are up for sale. So on the 21st of February, the Council, the EU-Israel Association Council is meeting, and we from this House do not expect anything less than the pressure, utmost pressure on the government of Netanyahu to commit to a long-term peace. And let me tell you how it starts. It starts with seriously committing by the Israeli side, by Netanyahu, to the ceasefire deal and the violence in the occupied West Bank and lifting the ban on UNRWA. And EU must invest in the rebuilding of Gaza, and that without forced displacement. And let this be very clear. You cannot have safety and peace in Israel if you do not have safety and peace in Palestine. All human rights matter. enough with the double standards.
Mulțumesc, vă rugăm să respectați timpul de vorbire.
Thank you. Please respect the speaking time. And the floor goes to Mrs. Yoncheva.
Dear colleagues, today we face a critical challenge once again, the future of the Middle East. And we find ourselves asking, how can the European Union make a meaningful impact? The answer lies in our commitment to a two-state solution. And this is not just an option. It's the only path to true and to lasting peace. The recent hostage deal is a vital step for the good example of diplomatic settlement. It's about bringing people back to home, to their homes, back to their families. And this process must continue without pause until every hostage, every man and woman is free and safe. I believe the Munich conference this week will provide a clear perspective, and I hope the European Union will take these matters into account in every discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează domnul.
Thank you very much. The floor goes to Mr. Kovachev.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Suica, dear Minister, dear colleagues. To foster peace and promote democratic values, the EU must strategically engage in the Middle East with a consistent and systematic approach. We must build partnership with each country based on shared goals while addressing the destabilizing malicious influence of Russian, Iranian acts of evil and their proxies in the region. Support for the Abraham Accords, release all Israeli hostages, recognize Israel's rights to exist, guaranteed a sustainable solution for the Palestinian people are essentials for regional peace and must be shared objective of the EU together with the Arab countries, the US and Turkey. Our comprehensive Middle East strategy should include support for Europe's partners in the region, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, who have been impacted by the flows of displaced persons, and we must build on the work towards sustainable solutions for refugees to return to their homes. To ensure a stable democratic future for Syria, the EU and Member States should actively support the transition period and set clear conditions under which we would legitimise the interim government and the future new constitution and government, and especially exclude the presence of Russian and Iranian infrastructure in Syria. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Evin Insir has the floor.
Commissioner, Minister, what I should have brought with me, though, is a sign that reads, Missing Person High Representative Kaja Kallas. As this is the second session we are discussing Middle East, and she has not been a part of the discussions. The Middle East is at a crossroad in many ways. Gaza is at risk of being occupied by a new force, the US under Trump. Yes, you heard me correctly. Trump's attempt to expel Palestinians from Gaza and take control is effectively replacing one occupying power, Israel, with another occupying power, US, while the Palestinian people are suffering. And this is a violation of international law. Meanwhile, Syria has rid itself of its brutal dictator and has a new power in place. However, the future remains uncertain, as we cannot realistically consider HDS a democratic force given their history, and Turkey is attacking the Kurds in the Rojava region. It is risking to put ISIS on our street. At the same time, in Turkey, the negotiations are taking place between the Turkish government and the PKK leader Öcalan. For the first time in a long time, the prospects seem positive for a resolution on the Kurdish issue and for a democratic Turkey. Development in Turkey will undoubtedly impact also Syria. Where is the HRVP? A silent voice is not a voice at all.
Urmează domnul Emanuel Frakos.
Thank you. The floor goes to Mr. Frakos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very many attacks against priests and Christians and murders in Lebanon and Syria. For separate cases in the United States, in Russia, in China and in Egypt, the European Parliament has made many resolutions for the systematic cleansing of Christians in the Middle East. However, we say nothing. We never say a thing, as if Christians are not human beings. Let's see solidarity showing by Israel to the Jews in the world, and we should find our compass, our Christian compass, our lost Christian identity. Hamas knows that attacks against Israeli citizens brings a decisive reply from Israel. Correspondingly, the Turkish jihadist agents in Syria and Lebanon to know that if they touch the Christians, our Christian brothers, they're going to receive a very overwhelming response. In this room, we have to represent Europe and not the Muslim Brotherhood. All the Christians, Orthodox, Armenians, Maronites, Catholics, Orthodox, should be protected by us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Indeed, all religions should be protected, in fact, by us. Next up, Billy Kelleher.
We're talking about a comprehensive EU Middle East strategy. Well, first and foremost, we must have a strategy around the issue of Israel and Palestine. And simply to date, the European Union doesn't have a strategy. It has been dishonest in its approach. It says on one hand that it supports a two-state solution. Yet over the last number of days, since President Trump announced that he was going to annex financially Gaza and make it into a Riviera, there has been no commentary from the Commission. Zero. And Council, the same. Our leadership across Europe has gone blind to the fact that the Palestinian people have now been told by the United States and by Europe by its complicity in its silence that Palestine has no right to exist. And yet we say that we are supporting the two-state solution. I have to say that our manner on this has been shameful, and we do owe it to ensure that we stand by our original proposals of a two-state solution, protecting the security and the right for Israel to exist, and also for Palestine, Gaza and the West Bank to live in security and independence as well. That's our stated policy, and it should be time that the Commission and the Council would stand up and voice that particular position.
Thank you, Mr. Kelleher. I give the floor to Mrs. Teodorescu-Mowbray.
Thank you very much, President. 80 years ago, emaciated, hollow-eyed Jewish prisoners were liberated from the Nazis. On Saturday, 3 emaciated, hollow-eyed Israelis were freed from the devilish tunnels of Gaza, and their appearance was a reminder that what should never have happened again has happened again in our full knowledge. So as we stand here and debate a new Middle East strategy, at the same time Hamas has said that the planned releases of hostages has been paused indefinitely. And I should remind this House that any strategy has to be based on Israel's right to exist and right to defend its existence. The path to peace in the region means a common struggle against the terrorist state of Iran and the Iranian proxies. If the EU is not going to be reduced to a cash point for terrorists, what we need is to call for the hostages are freed before it's too late, and that Hamas and all of the others who want to destroy Israel immediately capitulate.
The floor goes to Mr. Stier.
Poštovana gospođo povjerenice, strategija EU za Bliski istok morala bi imati barem 5 elemenata. Prvo,
Madam Commissioner, we need to have elements that combine bilateral relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, but we also need to work on the implementation of a two-state solution in order to have security and peace. Second, we need to have the Mediterranean Pact in order to have economic and energy cooperation with the region. Third, we need to fight the Muslim Brotherhood and their concept, which threatens the stability in Europe. Four, we need to fight against Iran ambitions in the region and globally. And 5, we need to protect Christian communities in the Middle East. If we don't do it, nobody will. This is our moral obligation, but also this is a political necessity. Nobody will take the EU seriously there if we don't protect Christians.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Szczerba.
President, Minister, it's time to express here in this hemicycle that the European Union can no longer be an active player that creates solutions when it comes to security in the Middle East. The situation in the Middle East is growing ever more complicated, and the Hamas attack from the 7th October 2023 led to bloodshed, chaos, and we await for the release of all hostages. We need an active policy, a policy that also moves forward the process of creating a civil society, but at the same time responds to humanitarian crises such as that in the Gaza Strip. When the U.S. is withdrawing its humanitarian aid, we need to take over, and this is our responsibility with this population.
Mr. Baker has the floor.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, for weeks and weeks there have been ever more absurd proposals from Trump. The latest plan to buy up the Gaza Strip and rebuild was not just unique, but also absurd. Absurd for the whole of humanity, and it shows once again clearly that Europe must be at the negotiating table when we're looking at the future of the Middle East. And this is not just because of the Palestinian and Israeli people who deserve peace. It is also for our own strategic interest. Stability and peace in the Middle East would mean fewer refugees. Half of Palestinian refugees are currently heading for Belgium, and then you could have less radicalization as well. And we need to deal with the alliance between Iran, Russia, and North Korea. So it is very important. We need to ensure that we have our own Middle East plan, Commissioner, and I'd be grateful if you could ensure that peace, stability, and a future prospect for the whole world are created this way.
Thank you. Mr. Pascual de la Parte has the floor.
Thank you, President. The Middle East is going through seismic changes that may change the geopolitical and geostrategic map of the region, and even borders may shift. But right now, what we have is a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, which gives us hope of peace coming back to that region. And there's a reality that we can't ignore. Between the Mediterranean Sea and the River Jordan, there are 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians, and they have to learn to respect each other and live in peace and reconciliate. And this is why we are in favor of the two-state solution as the only possibility which might lead to stability and safety for Israel and dignity and prosperity for Palestinians. And this needs to be implemented through our dialogue with Israeli and Palestinian authorities in order to put into effect a new deal for the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and a new strategy for the Gulf states as well. The Commission will be presenting these proposals, and we need to support them just like we are supporting our missions on the ground, such as UN COPS and UN Gaza, who are doing a magnificent job with very few resources. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor goes to Reinhold Lopatka.
The EU must act in adopting a comprehensive strategy for the Middle East very fast, particularly in the light of the developments in Syria and Israel. We have a responsibility to lead on fostering cooperation and diplomacy in the region, not least because it has a strong impact on our own security, stability and prosperity. Our relationship with the Gulf Cooperation Council, with which we have increased trade by over 35% only in one decade, highlights this potential. We need a free trade agreement with the GCC, but we also have to address the negative role of Iran and its proxies, destabilizing the region. And our support for a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine has to play a key role in this strategy, like the support for Israel in their fight against Hamas terrorists. Thank you.
Thank you. Dragi colegi, voi lua...
Thank you, dear colleagues. We are now moving on to the Catch the Eye part. I will give the floor to everybody. And I will start with Mr. Andriukaitis for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President, Madam Commissioner. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're discussing here is a wider comprehensive Middle East strategy. But what I think is that we need short-term measures right now. People are talking about the Gaza Riviera. This is for cartoonists to have a field day. But there's silence from the Commission. There are declarations going around that have nothing to do with the reality. So I simply can't understand and accept this silence from the Commission. At this moment in time, we need to have a loud and clear voice for the European Union when it comes to all of the violations of international law and the Geneva Convention and all of the other legal instruments.
Jan Tinkinen has the floor.
Mr. President, the EU's Middle East strategy is doomed if it follows once again the failed path of endless spending of taxpayers' money and weak diplomacy. We must learn from President Trump. His strong ultimatums immediately brought swift results in the region. Hamas doesn't listen to soft EU diplomacy talk. We need to be tougher, also money-wise. Why should we waste billions of euros on another continent when we have major crises on our own continent? We face growing crime, illegal migration and economic decline. Yet we have poured massive amounts of money into an area that is filled with radical Islam. You could say Europe has been stupid. The EU must prioritise our own security and our own economic strength. Let's finally put Europe first, our people, our borders and our future. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor goes to Ana Miranda Paz.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Chair. These empty words from President Trump saying he wants to annex Gaza and expel Palestinians who are in their legitimate territory, their place of their lifestyle, and where they wish to enjoy their life and not a life of genocide in the hands of Israel, taking the Palestinians away from Gaza. What a great idea Mr. Trump has. And I would like Ms. Callas to be here. Commissioner, you're here, you represent the Commission, but it would be expected for the High Representative to be here because it's the second time we have a debate on this topic. And she should be here and say high and loud what she thinks of these obscene words that attack the fundamental rights of people. Plus, ethnic displacement is forbidden by the UN. And I also agree on reviewing the agreement with Israel and the pertinent sanctions, because whoever commits genocide should be sanctioned.
Monsieur le Président. Madame la Commissaire.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, I've been trying to understand the EU's strategy in the Middle East. And firstly, I was told, well, it's about human rights. Human rights, but hang on. If Israel is involved in genocide against the Palestinians, when the Israelis are going from door to door, house to house, stealing and evicting Palestinians from their homes, the European Union just delivers weapons. Saudi Arabia executes a record number of prisoners last year, and we just let that happen. So you say, oh, well, no, but there's international law, and that matters to us. OK, but Israel is illegally occupying not only Palestine, but part of Lebanon and part of Syria, and you strengthen your bonds with Israel. Donald Trump threatens to deport 2 million Palestinian people. You say nothing. Now, I understand it's the economy. It's about gas and oil. You've said that. The economic corridor through the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Israel, even stealing the gas of the Palestinians, perhaps, and for that, you are trampling on the agreements of the Palestinians, on the bodies of the Arab peoples who just want sovereignty and to be able to decide their own fate themselves. Respect that, Commissioner.
Mrs. Jovanovic-Šošoka has the floor. Thank you very much. I hadn't heard. So we are talking right now about the Christians. When I came here with an icon, you sanctioned me. When I accused Ursula von der Leyen of actions that led to crimes during the pandemic, you sanctioned me. And now we're talking about defending the Christians. How to defend Christians in Arab countries when you accuse all Arab countries. You do not know them. You do not know the Persian. You do not know any Arab countries. You discredit Trump. You discredit everybody. You are at war with everybody. I would like to give you a piece of advice. Look at Nicolae Ceausescu's policies. Nobody equaled him. He was a dictator, but nobody was as good as he was at being a dictator. He was able to make peace in the region of the Middle East. So the European Commission does not seem to be ready. Mrs. von der Leyen only brings us war with everybody. And here from the plenary, I'd like to ask Ursula von der Leyen to quit. Thank you. I would like to add, as a president of this plenary, that Nicolae Ceausescu was also the perpetrator of millions of crimes in Romania. However, we are not having a debate about this right now. I will not give you the floor anymore. I am the president of this plenary right now. I would like to pass the floor right now to Mrs. Šuica for the European Commission.
Thank you, Chair, honourable members. Thank you for your interventions, for your feedback and your comments, which are very useful. This debate shows clearly that the Middle East region is a very important and crucial region for Europe. But more united and active European involvement is of paramount importance. I will try to reply to some of your questions. First of all, we are not silent. This is not the case. As we said in January Foreign Affairs Council, the Palestinian people have suffered greatly, and both Israelis and Palestinians deserve peace. This was one of the conclusions, and all of us know this. The ceasefire is a positive element, as you know, a positive development, but now we have to take steps to be taken. We have to take steps in order to bring these hostilities to end and to keep stability and peace in the region. From our point of view, once again, this requires a two-state solution. That is why the European Union is supporting the Palestinian Authority in its reforms to allow it to return to govern Gaza. So this is what we are doing. The international community must work with Palestinians to rebuild Gaza. We would welcome a proactive role from the United States in this reconstruction or reconstructing process. It is also worth recalling that among the 5 key conditions set by the Commission President last year on Gaza, one was that the essential part of the future Palestinian state, and there should not be any further displacement of Palestinians. This is something what we are saying and what were the conclusions of the Foreign Affairs Council in January. On Palestinian social protection law, yesterday the new social protection law has been signed by the Palestinian President Abbas and is now to be officially published. The law replaces all existing allowances, including the payment to the families of the prisoners and martyrs. This decision is fully in line with the reform matrix as agreed between the European Commission and the Palestinian Authority, so we certainly welcome this step by the Palestinian Authority. On UNRWA, the European Commission will continue to support UNRWA both politically and financially. Precise amounts are being defined according to our NDC Global Europe regulation, and that's it. Last year, the European Union disbursed 92 million euros to UNRWA, following the Commission's monitoring of the implementation of the conditions that were agreed for funding. So we were monitoring the situation. On European Union-Israel Association Council and high-level dialogue with the Palestinian Authority. The European Union-Israel Association Council will take place on the 24th of February. With 27 European ministers, as you know, who will be participating. The meeting will be the opportunity to discuss the situation in the Middle East, including the conflict in Gaza and European Union-Israel cooperation. The high-level dialogue with the Palestinian Authority will take place in the margins of the 17th March Foreign Affairs Council. The Palestinian Authority will be represented by Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mustafa. Regarding Gulf, someone said that he or she is in favor of a coordination with Gulf countries. Of course, this is exactly why Gulf countries are under my portfolio, Mediterranean, although we know that geographically they are not Mediterranean. We 100% agree with this. So with Gulf Coordination Council, we have to work, but of course bilaterally, because they are also, as you know, diverse. So increasing engagement with the Gulf will be a very important component here. You remember, this is what I said at the beginning, since the signature of the strategic partnership with the Gulf from 2022, we are trying to increase engagement with all 6 countries. Last but not least, the European Union's approach to the Middle East, as all of us know, should ensure full synergy with the proposals to be made under the new Pact for Mediterranean, which I mentioned, which will be done in consultance, first with this House, in consultance with Member States, but also in consultance with those on the other shore of Mediterranean. So this is something which we will be doing in the next 5-6 months. As I said, this debate is important, and I have to mention diplomatic efforts, which included first calling for the protection of civilians in line with international humanitarian law, then redoubling our humanitarian engagement in the region, then calling for the dialogue between Israel and its neighbour countries to continue to keep stability and peace in the region. And of course, we are seeking long-term solutions which bring peace and security to everyone. Yes, to conclude. Yes, Europe wants to be a player. We have a role there, and this is something which we want. Of course, we have to increase our role, and this is what we are doing. So we are, as you know, we are saying that we are pairs and not players. We want to be players, both players and pairs, not only pairs, and this is something which is important. So once again, I can agree with some of you. No cooperation with terrorists, de-radicalization, no hate speech, and of course promoting of democratic values or our common values. On our dear colleague HRVP, we work in synergy on the Middle East strategy. It's also part of my mission letter, so we are working together on this, so this is something which should be mentioned here. So she is working with us and she will be with you as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Mulțumesc și eu. Urmează din partea Consiliului domnul ministru Adam Schwabka.
Thank you too. On behalf of the Council, Minister Schwabka.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, honourable members, Madam Commissioner. Thank you very much for this debate. Today's exchange is a part of the ongoing reflection on the EU's engagement and actions in the Middle East at a time of many parallel developments that will shape the situation on the ground for years to come. In spite of our different views on the causes as well as on the solutions for the challenges faced by countries in the region, I take from this debate that we all agree that any outcome of current events in the Middle East will directly impact the stability, prosperity and security of the European Union. This is why our collective engagement in the region is crucial. I can assure you that on behalf of the High Representative, that the situation in the Middle East will remain the key priority for the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union. The Council looks forward to work together with the other EU institutions to promote peace and reconstruction in this vital region for the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Minister. I will ask you to continue because we switch to the next debate. Thank you for participating in a very heated debate. We will now continue with the Council and Commission declaration on violence in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, honourable members, Madam Commissioner. The war in the Democratic Republic of Congo is experiencing a new dramatic escalation. The M23 armed group, a UN-sanctioned entity backed by Rwanda and its armed forces, has advanced further in North and South Kivu and has captured Goma, a town of over 2 million people. The already dire humanitarian and human rights situation has worsened even further. The EU is extremely concerned by the ongoing escalation. This was made clear in our statement on 25 January 2025. Rwanda's support to M23 and direct military intervention in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is a blatant violation of its territorial integrity, which we condemned in the strongest terms. Rwanda must cease these actions. All other regional actors, including the Democratic Republic of the Congo, must stop any support and cooperation with all other armed groups operating in the country. The EU's priority is to contribute to efforts for an immediate ceasefire and a rapid, sustained resumption of peaceful negotiation under the Luanda process led by Angola. We urge Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo to re-engage in the process and abide by the commitments that were made. The EU has been actively pursuing these goals and in coordination with like-minded and regional partners. The President of the European Council recently spoke with President Tshisekedi and President Kagame and called for the political solution to the crisis. Also, the High Representative met with the former Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and clearly reaffirmed that territorial integrity is non-negotiable. Furthermore, the EU Special Representative for the Great Lakes region, who held discussion with the Foreign Minister of Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, will travel in the region in the coming days. Our intensified diplomatic outreach will continue in the coming days and weeks. The situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo will be discussed at the Foreign Affairs Council in February. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The floor goes to the Commissioner, Mrs. Šuica.
Dear Chair, honourable members, dear Minister Slapka, what is happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is not a new crisis. It is an escalation of the crisis within the crisis. The humanitarian situation is devastating. Already before the latest developments, there were 800,000 internally displaced persons around Goma, cramped in heavily populated sites for displaced persons. Since the attack on Goma by M23 and the Rwanda army, many displacement sites are now reported to have been emptied. Some occupants have fled to other neighborhoods of Goma. Others have attempted to return to their villages in the Masisi and Rushuru territories, which are currently under M23 control. The risk of forced closure of the remaining sites is high due to the policy of M23, which opposes the presence of this kind of sites in areas under its control. There are reports from Goma of around 3,000 deaths caused by the fighting, with bodies in the streets and overloaded morgues. All hospitals in this town are overcrowded, and many are operating at twice their capacity. The threat for epidemics such as cholera is growing. Humanitarian actors are slowly coming back now that the fighting is over, and assessments for restarting the response as soon as possible are ongoing, notably at sites for displaced and medical facilities. However, the response is severely hampered by the security situation and by a lack of available commodities, as many warehouses of humanitarian aid agencies were broken into and looting during the fighting. The airport of Goma was damaged in the fighting and is not operational for humanitarian aid flights. Humanitarian access to the most vulnerable people has been limited and remains a challenge where fighting is taking place. We need urgent political action to secure humanitarian truce, ensure the protection of civilians, and enable full humanitarian access. The European Union has insisted on key humanitarian messages to all parties in conflict. Keep borders open for refugees and humanitarian workers. Allow humanitarian corridors where appropriate and ensure principled humanitarian access. Ensure the protection of civilians and respect for international humanitarian law, particularly with the increased risk of gender-based violence in this context. Preserve the safety of humanitarian staff, health workers and medical facilities. Engage in negotiations for a humanitarian truce. It is imperative that the airport in Goma reopen for humanitarian flights to allow our partners to resupply their looted stocks and to bring in much-needed life-saving equipment. The European Union stands ready to continue supporting the humanitarian response. The European Union alone is the second largest humanitarian aid donor in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. We have allocated €112 million in humanitarian aid to the Democratic Republic of Congo last year. EU member states are also strongly contributing to this response. As a response to this new crisis within a crisis, the Commission has accelerated the disbursements of its initial 2025 budget for Democratic Republic of Congo of €60 million. We are currently establishing which humanitarian partners still have the capacity to effectively intervene. On that basis, we have pre-selected the first 6 partners already on the 27th of January, while the fighting for Goma was still raging for urgent interventions of €25 million of the €60 million announced. And we are ensuring that these funds will be dispersed without delay. Thank you.
Urmează acum numele partidelor politice din part.
Thank you on behalf of the political groups from the European People's Party, Mrs. Ingeborg Terlak.
Dank u, voorzitter, beste collega's, beste commissaris.
Thank you, President, colleagues. Commissioner, a state with a population of over 1 million is being conquered and set alight, a town with a population of over 1 million, and there are many people who are being driven out. Many people around the world have never heard of the city, but Goma is near the border of Rwanda and Uganda in the east of the DRC, and this is the reality in the Congo. Apparently, Russia has supported the Congolese government. Rwanda is using rebels to try to take minerals from Congo to Rwanda for export. We must not forget what this is really about. It is about human existence. There are huge numbers of people who are fleeing the area. Humanitarian aid cannot get through. Humanitarian aid organizations fear for the lives of their own workers. We must ensure that humanitarian organizations can get aid through and that peace returns. This is only possible if other countries stop funding the military for their own interests and take into account the suffering from the hundreds of thousands of people.
Thank you. On behalf of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, Marek Maj has the floor.
Ja, dank u wel, mevrouw de voorzitter.
Thank you very much. President, Commissioner, Minister. Well, Goma fell last month. More than 3,000 were killed. 500,000 on the run. And that's on top of the 7 million who have left the region in recent years. Child soldiers and all sorts of crimes. And this is all because the M23, with the support of Rwanda, has attacked Goma. M23 is financed illegally by the mineral wealth of the region of Kivu. And we know very well that the EU is investing in Rwanda. More than 900 million are going to Rwanda through the Global Gateway. And much of this is linked to minerals. Can we have a Commission call for a humanitarian corridor and assistance for the victims of sexual violence? We have to reflect on the role of the European Union. We should be suspending the critical raw materials agreement with Rwanda. We cannot allow a military...
Thank you very much. For the Patriots, Mr. Thierry Mariani.
Madame le Commissaire.
Mr. Mariani, Commissioner, this is not a humanitarian crisis. This has been ongoing for 30 years. In 30 years, we received Tony Mikiweke, Nobel Prize winner, that spoke about the situation in Kivu, and already in 2005 in this hemicycle we had a resolution on this crisis. But again, it's not a crisis. It's been ongoing for 30 years. For 30 years we've done nothing. We say we're going to send truckloads of aid, but we are not getting to the roots of evil. We know very well that a neighboring country is actually participating in the looting of the mineral resources of the DRC and then sells those minerals onto us. So we know who the accomplice is. It's the European Union. As you know, the European Union signed a treaty, or rather an agreement, on the 19th February of last year to buy these stolen minerals. And since September, I've been asking us to create a special committee on this topic, and no reply. Last week, there will be a meeting behind closed doors with no interpretation. We know what that means. We need to annul that agreement with Rwanda on minerals. And we need to suspend the security partnership with Rwanda and the 20 million euros promised by Europe within the framework of the European Rwanda facility. We need to firmly condemn and take concrete sanctions against those responsible for massacres and crimes in Rwanda. This is what we want, not voting a new resolution every 5 to 10 years.
Mulțumesc. Din partea grupului conservator.
Thank you. On behalf of European Conservatives and Reformists, Alberico Gambino has the floor.
Presidente, gentilissima.
President, Commissioner, well, what's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo is very worrying indeed. The fall of Goma, now in the hands of the M23 rebels, has set off a serious humanitarian crisis. But tension is growing in Kinshasa too. There's growing distrust on the part of the population and the international community. We need to start a new page. We need to create a relationship with Africa based on mutual respect and shared interests. The idea of the Italian Prime Minister Giorgio Meloni for a Mattei plan is one that needs to be picked up on to create growth, development and stability. But to create a vision for the future, we need to support the negotiation process that's being promoted by the African countries. Africa does not need intervention from on high, rather it needs reliable partners. Europe needs to demonstrate that it's up to the challenge of playing this role.
Grazie. Din partea grupului Renew Europe.
On behalf of Renew Europe, eudebates.tv has the floor.
Chers collègues, les morts du Congo.
Colleagues, the deaths in the Congo cannot wait for more reports. We need action. It's been over 30 years that the Congolese people have been massacred, raped and displaced. They should not be the subject for our speeches or timid condemnations. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we reacted immediately, and we were right. But now, the Congo is under attack. Where is our response? Why this indifference? What is happening in the east of the Congo is a war of occupation, direct occupation by Rwanda and its accomplices. The evidence is clear, and yet we in Europe are continuing to hold back and look for diplomatic solutions while the Congolese people are falling like flies. We have the means to act. We must do that now. Instead of rewarding Kagame with hundreds of millions of euros, we should be adopting sanctions which should hit where it hurts. We must immediately suspend the protocol agreement on raw materials with Rwanda. We need to extend sanctions against the leaders in Rwanda and in M23. We must also block all European assistance to Kigali. And then finally, we must guarantee access for humanitarian aid and protection of the Banzi hospital. How naive can we be? Any other response would be a betrayal of our own European interest and of our fundamental values. Europe must stop being complicit by its inaction. Let's be on the right side of history. Our children will judge us by what we do today and not by our fine speeches and intentions. Thank you.